The air in the throne of Ethel tasted like cold ozone and pulverized iron. It clung to the back of Elias Thorne's throat, metallic and ancient, a stark contrast to the filtered, recycled atmosphere he was used to breathing aboard the UTC Starcruiser Defiance. But the oppression of the atmosphere was nothing compared to the figure seated 50 feet before him. She was the gravity well in this room, a singularity of power that warped light and silence. Queen Lyra Valerius. Elias, an envoy of the unified Terran Commonwealth, stood rigid and unmoving, dressed in the dark, non-reflective gray uniform that marked him as one of the few humans audacious enough to step onto a world claimed by the K1. He should have been focused entirely on the scroll of peace conditions clutched in his left hand, the meticulously worded treaty that had taken 3 solar cycles to draft and was meant to stave off another millennia of border warfare. But Elias wasn't thinking about peace. He wasn't thinking about the millions of lives depending on his diplomacy, or the tactical advantage of the KYN's antimatter shielding, or the silent, winged, obsidian guards flanking the throne, whose faces were carved monuments to hatred. He was looking at her eyes. They were not merely red, they were crimson, molten rubies set into a face of alabaster perfection. Her hair, the color of newly fallen snow, cascaded over the black and blood-red armor that encased her slender form. A crown of sharp, interlocking shadow metal rested on her head, echoing the immense, folded wings that rose like dark banners behind her. She was a nightmare chiseled into existence, a harbinger of death, and the instant his eyes met hers, something irreparable happened inside the usually calculated, analytical mind of Elias Thorne. It was not fear. It was not awe. It was a dizzying, terrifying, utterly illogical certainty. I'm going to marry her. The thought slammed into him with the force of an energy blast, so profound and immediate that Elias actually fought the urge to flinch. His breath hitched, a near-fatal mistake in a place where any deviation from absolute composure was read as weakness. He was a human diplomat, a political soldier tasked with preserving the peace of the Terran sector, and he had just fallen head over heels in love with the immortal, blood-drinking, genocidal sovereign of the KYN Empire. And worse, she knew. Lyra Valerius did not move a muscle. She didn't smile, she didn't frown, yet the corner of her perfect mouth twitched, the slightest, almost imperceptible upward curve, a gesture that spoke volumes in a room built on silence. Her crimson gaze deepened, boring through his uniform, his skin, and the carefully constructed walls of his mind. She was not reading his diplomatic intent, she was reading his soul. And she found the most ridiculous, reckless, dangerous impulse a mortal mind could possibly conceive. You stand before the throne of Ethel, little Terran, her voice finally broke the silence, a low, smooth chord that vibrated deep in the crystalline floor beneath his boots. You come bearing a request for respite, a plea for us to halt the cleansing of your pathetic colonial borders. Yet your mind, it speaks volumes beyond your treaties. Elias forced his gaze to drop to the glowing ruby-like pendant set into her breastplate, anywhere but her eyes, but her power kept yanking his focus back. He swallowed hard, pushing the ridiculous, pulsing desire down into a hidden compartment of his consciousness. Focus. Duty. Your Majesty, Elias began, his voice surprisingly level and clear, practiced by hundreds of simulations. I am Envoy Elias Thorne, representative of the unified Terran Commonwealth. I come not to plead, but to offer a mutually beneficial cessation of hostilities along Sector Alpha 9. The UTC wishes to allocate resources to the Malthusian plague containment, and we understand the KYN Empire has its own internal resource allocation priorities related to the recent solar flare anomaly. Lyra leaned forward fractionally on her throne, the movement subtle yet devastating, like a mountain shifting. The shadows in the cavernous room seemed to deepen around her. Mutual benefit, she repeated, the words dripping with ancient amusement. How quaint. You bring us a piece of paper written by creatures whose lifespans are shorter than my morning meditation, and you speak of mutual benefit. The only benefit I see is the continuation of your species for another brief moment. The 2 guards on the left, hulking figures with faces obscured by high collars and winged helmets, shifted their weight, their immense sabers scraping faintly against the stone. The message was clear. One wrong word, one flicker of fear, and he would be a smear on the marble. Elias took a measured breath, mentally reviewing the HFY protocols. The KYN respected strength and audacity, not subservience. With respect, Your Majesty, the UTC is prepared for continuation or annihilation. We have demonstrated our resilience against the Xylos hegemony, the KRYL swarms, and your own forces over the last 4 centuries. The cessation is not a plea, it is a calculated pause. One that prevents the deployment of our orbital deterrents, which, while mutually destructive, would render 3 of your core harvesting worlds uninhabitable for 2,000 cycles. We are merely offering you a more convenient timeline for expansion elsewhere. He finished the statement and held his breath. That was the diplomatic nuclear option. It had to work. Lyra's lip curled slightly, and this time the amusement was laced with predatory hunger. A threat disguised as a treaty. How very human, she purred. But I find the little words on your little scroll far less interesting than the loud, utterly chaotic screaming in your skull, little human. Elias felt a prickle of cold dread that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. His advanced mental shielding, designed to thwart basic telepathic probes, was nothing more than tissue paper to her. I am afraid I don't follow, Your Majesty, Elias lied smoothly, trying to focus his thoughts solely on the chemical composition of the air filter in his uniform. Lyra let out a soft, dry laugh, a sound that should have been grating but somehow only fueled the absurd fire in Elias's chest. Oh, but you do follow, Envoy Thorn. While your mouth recites the mundane metrics of war, your heart, that tiny frantic pump of human blood, whispers the most dangerous blasphemy I have heard in 3 millennia. She lifted a perfectly manicured hand, her fingertips tipped with sharp, black talons, and gestured vaguely at him. It screams of love at first sight. The room was utterly silent now, save for the faint, flickering hum of the arcane energies that powered the fortress. Even the silent Kwang guard seemed to lean in, intrigued by their queen's unusual display of personal attention. Elias felt his composure shatter, not from fear of being killed, but from the humiliation of being so thoroughly exposed. His face, trained for stoicism, flushed dark red under his pale skin. Your Majesty, that is an unacceptable breach of diplomatic protocol and a delusional misinterpretation of my duty, he stated, his voice now a low, strained growl. Is it? Lyra tilted her head, her crimson eyes twinkling with malicious delight. You come into my throne room, which smells of the eternal cold of space and the blood of fallen empires, you look upon the creature designated by your pathetic little species as the ultimate evil, and your first thought is not to run, not to beg for your miserable life, but to possess me. To claim the queen of the K1. I had no idea Terran males were so suicidal or so charmingly naive. She paused, letting the weight of her words crush him. No, Envoy Thorn, there is no misinterpretation. There is only truth. And that truth makes your little paper treaty completely obsolete. I don't deal with paper from a species that believes I can be contained by ink and fear. I deal in currency I understand, audacity, ambition, and blood. Lyra pushed herself fully off the throne. The movement was slow, deliberate, and hypnotic. Her wings unfurled slightly, revealing the sheer, terrifying scale of her power, casting deep, moving shadows that swallowed the glow of the sacrificial candles. She was taller than he was, radiating lethal grace. She stopped just a few feet away, close enough for Elias to smell the faint, intoxicating scent of musk, ozone, and something ancient and floral. His mind screamed contradictory orders. Run. And kneel. The one prevailing thought remained, beautiful. What? Here is my counteroffer, Envoy, Lyra whispered, her voice dangerously close to his ear, yet she hadn't moved her lips. It was purely telepathic, a command echoing in his skull. The terms of your ceasefire are meaningless to me. But your audacity, your foolish human love at first sight, that is entertaining. I will consider your cessation if, and only if, you dedicate that ridiculous ambition to my service. Elias forced his gaze up, meeting the crimson fire of her eyes. Service, Your Majesty? Yes. You claim to love me. Prove it. I have an internal problem that requires the cunning of a human, a species known for its resilience and its desperate, clawing ambition. Her eyes narrowed. You have made a claim on me, Elias Thorn. I accept the challenge. You have 3 cycles to retrieve an artifact stolen by a rogue general, a general who believes he is worthy of the throne. She stepped back, the immense pressure lessening, though the crushing certainty of his fate remained. Succeed, and I will grant your Terran Commonwealth their truce. Fail, and I will not only execute you but I will personally lead the annihilation of your home system, starting with that wretched little moon base you call New Earth. Your treaty, your planet, and your very survival now depend entirely on the strength of your stupid, pathetic human heart. Lyra gave him a smile that promised both eternal ecstasy and immediate destruction. Welcome to my court, Envoy Thorn. The treaty is dismissed. The courting begins now. She snapped her fingers. The air shimmered, and before Elias could utter another word, he felt a crushing, disorienting pull. The ancient fortress, the immense throne, and the terrifying queen blurred into a streak of red and black, and he was violently ejected from the throne room and out into the cold, alien sky of Ethel. He tumbled through the atmosphere, scrambling desperately to deploy the microthrusters embedded in his uniform's collar, clutching the useless peace treaty scroll in one hand, and realizing his entire civilization was now betting on a human man who was hopelessly, ridiculously, irrevocably in love with the Devil Queen. The clock had started. The micro-thrusters fired with a panicked, high-pitched whine, scalding the cold air around Elias as he plummeted through the low atmosphere of Ethel. He had been thrown out of the central spire, the gravitational manipulation ceasing the instant Lyra snapped her fingers. His diplomatic uniform, designed for polite stiffness, was now performing a desperate ballet of survival. The descent was jarring, the inertia compensation systems fighting a brutal, losing battle against the raw planet-wide gravity field. Focus, Thorn. Survive the drop. He angled his body, using the suit's limited airfoils, cutting through the red haze until he could make out the sprawling, shadow-draped megalopolis beneath the fortress. The landing protocols kicked in late, impacting him with the force of a high-speed vehicle crash. Elias hit the flat roof of a dilapidated factory complex, the reinforced polymer tiles cracking violently beneath him. The impact lights on his helmet flared red, then green, indicating critical system damage but structural integrity holding. He lay there for a moment, chest heaving, listening to the cacophony of the alien city, a grinding, metallic song punctuated by guttural shouts and the distant roar of K-1 flyers. The realization sank in. He was alive, he was on Ethel, and he was now the sole hope for humanity, all because he was stupid enough to fall in love with the ultimate apex predator. Elias pushed himself to his knees, ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder joint. He reached up and keyed the comm implant hidden beneath his jaw. It utilized a localized, highly encrypted quantum entanglement frequency, designed only for dire emergencies or Black Ops coordination on hostile worlds. Thorn to Sparrow. Mission parameters, severely altered. Require immediate extraction and intel on objective. Artifact theft, possible internal power struggle. Code Sigma Gamma 3. The connection crackled then cleared. A cynical, gravelly voice, a voice Elias had only heard twice before in remote briefings, answered. Sparrow here. Code confirmed. Took you long enough, Envoy. We heard the Queen tossed a piece of garbage out the highest window a moment ago. Didn't expect it to be the diplomat. I'm alive, Yarrick. That's what matters, Elias grit out. Debatable. You have 20 minutes to reach Sector Gamma 12, Sublevel 5 entrance of the Obsidian Smelter. Don't get caught. My life expectancy drops exponentially every second I'm tied to one of Her Majesty's little, courting rituals. Elias checked his internal navigation overlay. Gamma 12 was a labyrinth of toxic manufacturing districts, nearly 5 miles away. He detached the diplomatic scroll, the worthless parchment, and left it on the cracked roof. He was no longer a diplomat. He was a thief, a spy, and a man driven by the most dangerous obsession in the galaxy. He moved across the rooftops, utilizing years of military training usually reserved for low-G boarding actions. The city below was a nightmare of Gothic architecture merged with heavy industrial machinery, all illuminated by the sickly red-blue glow of Lyra's fortress and the omnipresent, flickering candlelight of the K-1. When he finally reached the smelter, a colossal structure belching corrosive, green smoke into the sky, he found Yarrick waiting. Yarrick was not KYN or even Terran. He was a Krellian, a member of a near-humanoid species known for their uncanny ability to blend into the shadows and their complete lack of emotional effect. Yarrick wore heavily modified environmental gear and carried the weary posture of a lifetime spent in morally ambiguous service. You look terrible, Envoy, Yarrick said flatly, his voice filtered through a distorted comm unit. Did you really think you could negotiate with the Queen of Eternal Midnight? The terms changed, Elias said, stepping through the concealed entry point Yarrick had opened. She requires an artifact back. A general is challenging her throne. I retrieve the artifact, she grants the truce. Yarrick stopped cold, turning his helmeted head toward Elias. That's what she told you? Good gods, she's even crueler than I thought. She didn't just reject your treaty, she turned you into her pet assassin. She called it a courting ritual, Elias corrected, the word feeling heavy and desperate on his tongue. Yarrick let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a mechanical groan. Of course she did. That woman is ancient, Thorn. She finds your frantic little human life cycle hilarious. She's giving you a task designed to kill you and your delusional infatuation simultaneously. They started moving through the dark, cramped service tunnels beneath the factory. The air here was thicker, tasting of burnt organics and sulfur. Tell me about the objective, Elias demanded, trying to shift the focus away from his exposed feelings. The artifact and the rogue general. The general is Volkov. Used to be one of Lyra's most trusted executioners. Powerful, smart, and ambitious, which is a lethal combination when serving an immortal queen, Yarrick explained, his boots silent on the rusted floor plating. Volkov believes Lyra has grown soft, too obsessed with ancient bloodlines and tradition, neglecting the technological advances of the lesser races. He's managed to garner significant support from the younger, more militaristic KYN forces who want outright war with the UTC, not these pointless centuries of skirmishes. And the artifact? It's called the Sanguine Key, Yarrick said, the name given reverent weight even in his cynical voice. It's not a weapon. It's a mechanism, an ancestral regulator. Lyra doesn't rule solely by strength, she rules by divine right, a right secured by tradition and biological stability. The Sanguine Key is the original genetic template for the entire royal KYN bloodline. It allows the queen to selectively suppress or enhance traits in her genetic descendants, ensuring the purity and singular power of her lineage. Elias frowned. So, if Volkov has it, he can potentially dilute her power or even mutate a new, challenging queen? Worse, he can trigger a catastrophic genetic collapse within the royal line, destabilizing the entire empire overnight. It would be anarchy. And Lyra knows that if the empire collapses from within, the resulting chaos will spill out into the galaxy in a flood of disorganized, ravenous KYN warlords. That would be worse for your commonwealth than a controlled war. The stakes had just quadrupled. It wasn't about a diplomatic truce anymore, it was about preventing a galactic dark age. Volkov is hiding in the glacial expanse, beneath the shield facility at Sector Beta 4, Yarrick continued. Impossible to get in. Too many layers of ancient warding and modernized military protection. We need a way in, and that means going through the transport hubs. Elias felt the ridiculous, consuming passion for Lyra harden into a desperate resolve. He wasn't just saving his people, he was serving her. He was performing the ultimate act of devotion, proving that his human love was not pathetic, but the most powerful, driven force in existence. It was insane, but it gave him clarity. If I retrieve the key, she must honor her word, Elias muttered, checking the charge on his small, highly illegal energy pistol. She'll honor her word, Thorn. She's a tyrant, but she has pride. She'll grant the truce, but then she'll figure out a slow, delicious way to consume you and your terrifying obsession. That's her true reward. Yarrick paused at a heavy steel door, keying in a complex sequence. The trick is surviving the courtship. The door hissed open, revealing a cramped service lift. They stepped inside. Volkov is moving the key tonight. The best chance we have is to intercept the transport convoy as it leaves the main docking bay of the central citadel, Yarrick stated. It's suicide, but it's the only plan. Good, Elias replied, feeling the familiar high-stakes adrenaline rush. He adjusted his stance, checking his grip on the weapon. Suicide is an appropriate motivation when the reward is a queen. Yarrick merely shook his head, looking at the human with a mixture of pity and scientific interest. You Terrans are truly baffling. Let's move. We're heading for the transport hub now. It's time to start proving your love, envoy. The lift began its rapid, bone-jarring ascent, taking them directly into the belly of the KYN's operational domain, a place where Elias Thorn, driven by an impossible, insane love, was about to pit human audacity against the might of an immortal general. The transport lift slammed to a halt, the sudden stop rattling Elias's teeth. The doors hissed open, revealing the immense, echoing space of the Citadel's secondary transport hub. It was a cavernous dome where massive, armored KYN cargo freighters, shaped like immense black coffins, were being loaded and prepped for deep space transit. The air thrummed with the noise of magnetic loaders, the deep rumble of engines, and the authoritative, harsh vocalizations of KYN supervisors. Sector Delta 9, Docking Bay 42, Yarrick whispered into his comm, the sound barely audible over the industrial din. Volkov's personal freighter, the Vengeance of Ethel, is being prepped there. The Sanguine Key is on board. We need to be on that ship before it leaves the gravity well. Elias scanned the area. The place was crawling with KYN ground forces, clad in heavy, spiked environmental armor. They were larger, more physically imposing than the standard palace guards, indicating they were Volkov's loyalists. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency. Too much ground presence, Elias noted, keeping his back pressed against the cold metal of a derelict conduit housing. We'll never make it across the docking floor. We need a distraction. Distraction is an amateur's tool, Yarrick replied flatly. We use deception. Look up. Maintenance catwalk 300 meters. Leads directly to the cargo hatches. Elias followed Jarrick's gaze. High above the chaos, a series of narrow, rusted metal walkways crisscrossed the dome. They were meant for drone maintenance and emergency repair, paths less traveled. A long shot, but better than a frontal assault, Elias agreed. The climb was brutal, relying on magnetic gloves and brute strength to ascend the slick vertical support struts. When they finally reached the catwalk, the view was breathtaking and terrifying. They were above the industrial ceiling, concealed by immense energy conduits and the permanent dust cloud of the facility. Below them, Docking Bay 42 was a hive of activity. Volkov himself is supervising the loading, Yarek pointed out, his voice now a low hiss of static. Elias saw him. General Volkov. He was instantly recognizable, a towering figure even among the Kewin, wearing armor of dull, ancient bronze, lacking the sleek, modern ornamentation of Lyra's court. He looked like a brutalist sculpture of war. He was barking orders, his immense wings tucked tightly against his back, radiating impatience. A squad of 8 highly specialized KYN soldiers, Volkov's personal elite, formed a tight perimeter around a heavily shielded container being loaded into the ship's primary vault. That's the key, Elias confirmed, spotting the container. It was relatively small, secured by layers of KYN cipher locks and warding seals. We need to be inside Vengeance of Ethel before they engage the outer lock, Yarek said. The moment they do, we're trapped here and the mission fails. How much time? 10 minutes maximum. They're running hot. Elias felt the desperate need for haste sharpen his focus. He had to think like Lyra would, audaciously, ruthlessly, betting on the impossible. Plan B, Elias declared, pulling out a handful of small, specialized flash drives from a hidden pocket in his uniform. These were not weapons. They were highly illegal UTC military-grade data spikes. I'm taking the central conduit. It runs directly over the cargo bay. Thorn, that conduit is energized. You'll be vaporized by the primary load sequence. Yarek protested. Not if I hijack the load sequence first. Elias secured his comm link. Yarek, I need you to create a localized magnetic dampening field in Docking Bay 41, adjacent to our target. It'll flicker the local lights, nothing more, but it will momentarily draw attention away from the loading sequence. You're going to rely on a momentary flicker of light to drop into the path of an immortal warlord? Yarek sounded genuinely incredulous. I'm relying on a KYN's ingrained arrogance. They won't look up if they think the problem is a power fluctuation below them. They never expect an attack from above. Before Yarek could argue further, Elias was moving. He strapped himself to the massive, cylindrical conduit, a primary power line carrying energy the equivalent of a small fusion reactor, and began shimmying across it, using the magnetic gloves to hold onto the pulsing metal. The heat radiating from the conduit was intense, burning through his suit's heat sinks. He reached the point directly above the Vengeance of Ethel's open cargo bay. Below him, General Volkov stood, impatient, his back to the ship, monitoring the final security checks. No. Yarek, dampening field. Execute, Elias commanded. In Docking Bay 41, the massive sodium lamps flickered violently, plunging a section of the floor into sudden darkness. It was a minor incident, but enough. Volkov instinctively snapped his head towards the interruption, and 2 of his elite guards did the same. In that split second, Elias jammed 2 data spikes into a maintenance port on the conduit. The spikes instantly overloaded the circuit, causing a massive energy surge to shoot down the line, but critically, it momentarily disabled the conduit's exterior heat signature, creating a pocket of thermal invisibility. Elias let go. He dropped 30 feet, angling his fall to land directly onto the heavily armored shoulder of the 3rd elite guard, the one still looking away. The impact was bone-jarring, but Elias's human body, smaller and more agile, acted like a focused projectile. The guard didn't even have time to shout. Elias used the KYN's broad shoulder as a platform, planting his boot and leaping forward, directly into the open cargo hatch of the Vengeance of Ethel. Chaos erupted below. Intruder. Seal the bay. Volkov roared, whirling around just as Elias disappeared into the shadows of the cargo hold. Elias landed hard inside the ship, rolling to his feet behind a stack of energy cells. Alarms began wailing, a high, shrill sound that meant the ship was preparing for immediate lockdown. He was inside. Yarek, I'm in. Lock the airlock remotely if you can, Elias hissed. Impossible, Thorn. It's manually controlled from the bridge. You have about 60 seconds before they breach the hold. You need to find that vault and neutralize the lock, Yarek replied, his voice tight with tension. Elias could hear the heavy, rhythmic thudding of Volkov's boots as the general and his remaining squad stormed up the loading ramp. He moved fast, finding the heavily armored vault housing the Sanguine key. It was a self-contained module, currently attached to the ship's internal power grid. The KYN locks were complex, a combination of arcane seal and digital cipher. I fell in love at first sight. And the Vampire Queen knew immediately. The thought of Lyra, the queen who had tossed him into this abyss, filled Elias with a reckless, terrifying surge of energy. This wasn't about logic or survival, it was about proving himself worthy of her attention. He pulled a small, specialized Terran cipher breaker from his kit. It was an illegal, cutting-edge piece of tech capable of forcing the KYN's complex encryption, but it would take critical seconds. He began the sequence, the small device humming frantically. 40 seconds. The vault door's internal security system lit up, a grid of blue energy lines interlocking, resisting the Terran intrusion attempt. 30 seconds. The thunder of KYN boots echoed off the hull plating, much closer now, just beyond the thick blast doors separating the hold from the main entrance ramp. Elias worked with blurring speed, his focus absolute, filtering out the fear and the adrenaline. He saw the pattern in the KYN's ancient cipher, a flaw based on the symmetry of their language, and exploited it. 20 seconds. He heard the heavy metallic grind of the blast doors beginning to open. Destroy the human. Volkov's voice was a low, terrifying growl. The cipher breaker finished its work. Lockdown seals overridden. The internal vault door hissed open, revealing the sanguine key, a shimmering, fist-sized crystal of condensed crimson light, pulsing with deep, organic energy, seated in a velvet-lined casket. It looked like a living jewel. Elias grabbed it. The crystal was cold, emitting a powerful, seductive energy that resonated strangely with the reckless love in his heart. He didn't have time to savor the victory. Volkov and his elite were pouring into the cargo bay, their energy rifles raised. "You pathetic little creature," Volkov roared, raising a massive two-handed energy cannon. "You dare steal from the general of the KYN." Elias didn't aim for Volkov. He aimed for the ship. He threw 2 flash grenades, miniature Terran disruptors, at the nearest main engine conduit. Soxek. The grenades discharged, not causing an explosion, but a massive magnetic pulse that fried the local electronics and, more importantly, caused a catastrophic engine overload. The vengeance of Ethel lurched violently. Red emergency lights flashed everywhere. The KYN soldiers, used to perfect order, stumbled, their targeting systems failing. Elias didn't wait. He sprinted toward a small auxiliary maintenance hatch on the ship's side, pulling out the small grappling hook he'd been saving. "He's escaping. Bring him down," Volkov screamed, firing his cannon. A bolt of raw energy screamed past Elias's head, vaporizing the metal where he had stood a second before. Elias shot the grappling hook, the magnetic claw biting deep into the hull just above the hatch. He yanked the hatch open, plunging into the inky blackness of the space between the ship and the docking bay wall. "Yark. I have the key. Get a retrieval vehicle now. Retrieval is initiating." Jarek's voice was strained. "Hold tight, Thorn. They've sealed the whole bay. It's going to be a rough ride." Volkov was right behind him, his massive, spiked gauntlet gripping the edge of the opening. Elias could see the general's face, contorted with rage and disbelief. "You will not succeed, human. You will not touch the Queen's power," Volkov bellowed, lunging forward. Elias, hanging precariously from the rope, thrust his leg out and kicked with all his remaining strength. Not at Volkov but at the hatch itself. The impact caused the door to slam back onto the general's head with a deafening metallic clang. Volkov howled in pain and fury, momentarily stunned. Elias swung across the docking bay, the sanguine key clutched tightly in one hand. Below him, the vengeance of Ethel was now a smoking, damaged wreck. Just as the KYN ground forces began to realize where he was, a sleek, heavily shielded transport vessel, painted in the matte black of the Krellian smugglers, shot across the docking bay, a single rope ladder dangling precariously. Elias grabbed the ladder, the momentum nearly tearing his arm from its socket. He was hauled up just as Volkov, staggering, emerged from the wreck of his ship, firing wildly into the sky. The Krellian ship accelerated to near light speed, leaving the citadel and the horrified general behind. Elias looked down at the crimson crystal in his hand, then up at the immense, cruel, beautiful fortress of his love. The courting has truly begun. The ascent into the fortress of Ethel was silent, swift, and entirely unlike the terrifying diplomatic entrance Elias had made hours earlier. Yarek piloted the black transport vessel, a marvel of Krellian stealth technology, through high-altitude energy shields, slipping into a concealed docking bay deep within the bedrock of the fortress's base. Elias was bruised, exhausted, and the high-G maneuvers had left his stomach churning, but he felt an electric surge of exhilaration. He looked down at his hand. The sanguine key rested there, no longer cold but pulsating with a warm, steady rhythm that mirrored his own frantic heartbeat. It felt powerful, dangerous, and uniquely hers. "You're either the luckiest man in the galaxy or the stupidest," Thorn Yarek muttered, securing the ship. His helmeted head turned to regard the blood-red crystal. "Volkov is currently trying to peel the hull off my escape route with his bare hands. He's disgraced, furious, and now he knows your name. You're hunted by an immortal warlord. And I have the key," Elias countered, securing the artifact inside a shielded pocket in his uniform. Yes, you did the impossible, envoy. But don't mistake that for affection, Yarrick warned, his voice devoid of sympathy. You were a disposable pawn. A human. She sent you because failure meant nothing to her, and success meant the greatest humiliation to Volkov. She's using your absurd devotion as a psychological weapon against her enemies. Don't think for a second she cares about your little Terran truce. She keeps her promises, Elias insisted, though the argument felt flimsy even to his own ears. She said if I retrieved the key, the truce would be granted. Yarrick merely shrugged, the gesture heavy with cynicism. Let's hope you're right. But your reward might just be a comfortable cage rather than a planet-killing bullet. A squad of Lyra's personal guard, not Volkov's dark brutalists, but the sleek, obsidian-clad sentinels from the throne room, met them at the airlock. They were silent, efficient, and escorted Elias alone through a maze of hidden corridors and ancestral halls lined with the petrified remains of ancient Kwan enemies. Elias was no longer entering as a diplomat. He was entering as a clandestine servant. He was led not to the main entrance but directly behind the throne. The doors opened without sound, and Elias stepped into the familiar, chilling presence of the throne of Ethel. Lyra Valerius was seated exactly where she had been. The crimson light, the towering pillars, the sense of crushing ancient power, nothing had changed except the intensity of the gaze fixed upon him. Elias walked the length of the hall, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, driven purely by the need to reach her. He stopped before the throne, dropping to one knee in a spontaneous gesture of respect that owed nothing to protocol and everything to obsession. Your Majesty, Elias said, his voice husky. I return with the asset. He presented the sanguine key, holding the pulsing crimson crystal up for her inspection. Lyra did not reach for it immediately. Her eyes, those molten pools of crimson light, were fixed entirely on Elias. She studied the grime on his face, the scorch marks on his uniform, the trembling exhaustion in his shoulders, and the burning irrational pride in his eyes. Such a pathetic thing, a human heart, she murmured, her voice soft enough to be a caress, cold enough to be a prophecy. It is so easily corrupted by desire, yet so ferociously capable when driven by it. You survived the unsurvivable. You humiliated an enemy who has survived 3 imperial reigns. And you did it for love. What a spectacular display of reckless obedience. She finally reached out, her sharp black talons grasping the key. As her fingers closed around the crystal, it pulsed once, fiercely, and settled. It was home. Lyra's power seemed to amplify instantaneously, the very air in the room vibrating with renewed, regal authority. The sanguine key is returned. My thanks, Envoy Thorn. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and Elias felt a fleeting moment of pure, terrifying approval. I keep my promises. The diplomatic courier vessel carrying the signed cessation of hostilities treaty for Sector Alpha 9 was dispatched to your Commonwealth headquarters 5 minutes ago. Your people are safe for now. Relief, profound and absolute, washed over Elias. He had done it. He had saved billions, driven by the insanity of his love. My gratitude, Your Majesty, he whispered, dropping his head in genuine deference. Do not thank me yet, Lyra purred. This was merely the preliminary trial, Thorn. The entry fee. The game has just begun. She leaned forward. You ask why Volkov was so desperate to possess this key. He didn't just want power, he wanted to destroy my purity. The key in the wrong hands doesn't just destabilize the KYN line. It specifically makes the current wielder of the throne susceptible to a unique ancient toxin developed by the Xylos hegemony. Volkov had already secured the antidote for himself. Had he succeeded, I would have faced a slow, debilitating decay while he assumed power. Her eyes narrowed to slits of cold fury. He dared to try and kill his queen with weakness. He dared to stain my sacred bloodline. The truce is signed, but my revenge is not complete. Volkov is disgraced, but he lives. He has retreated to the rogue planet of Obsidian Fall, a derelict mining base shielded by ancient geothermal interference. He plans to regroup and build his own war fleet. Lyra held the sanguine key against her breastplate, the crimson glow illuminating her face. I now require more than just a delivery boy. I require a hunter. You have proven you possess the audacity, the stealth, and the sheer recklessness needed. I want Volkov's head, Thorn. I want it delivered to me on a platter of his own shattered ambition. The true test was revealed. The mission had pivoted from duty to personal vendetta, dragging Elias deeper into the KYN's internal politics. Succeed, Lyra commanded, her voice sinking to a mesmerizing, hypnotic level, and I will not just grant a truce. I will grant you something far more precious than the survival of your short-lived species. I will grant you proximity. I will keep you at my side, Elias Thorn. You will be my consort, my shadow, the human who proved his love by mastering the impossible and delivering my most dangerous enemy. The promise struck Elias like a bolt of lightning, fulfilling the insane desire he had felt the moment he first saw her. Consort. At her side. He knew the danger, the ultimate power imbalance, but the thought of being near her, serving her, existing within her gravity, overwhelmed all fear. He rose from his knee, his eyes locked on hers, the exhaustion replaced by feverish, dedicated commitment. It will be done, Your Majesty, Elias vowed, his voice steady. General Volkov will not trouble your reign again. Lyra finally gave him a smile, a flash of perfect teeth that looked sharp enough to draw blood. It was terrifying and intoxicating. Good. Now go. You have 3 Terran weeks before Volkov's fleet is operational. Take the Krellian with you, he has utility. And take this. She snapped her fingers again. An obsidian guard stepped forward, presenting a simple, matte black wrist cuff, Terran technology, but heavily modified with KYN power sources. That device, Lyra instructed, will grant you immediate low-level access to certain KYN military channels and provide passive shield resistance against the geothermal interference on Obsidian Fall. Use it to find your target. Now leave my sight. I have a planet to rule and Volkov's failure to save her. Elias took the cuff, fastening it to his wrist. It felt warm and powerful. He gave a sharp, military nod, the envoy protocol momentarily returning. Then he turned and strode out, the image of Lyra's predatory smile burned into his mind. He found Yarrick waiting in the hidden corridor, leaning against the cold stone wall, looking impatient. So what's the reward, Thorn? Yarrick asked dryly. A quick death or a slightly longer death? Elias looked at the Krellian, a flicker of something close to pity in his eyes. Neither, Elias said, fastening the new black cuff. The reward is more work. We're going to Obsidian Fall to hunt a general. And the reward for success is a seat beside the Queen. Yarrick stared at him, then sighed, adjusting his environmental gear. Obsidian Fall. That's a grave, Thorn. You know that, right? Maybe, Elias admitted, a manic edge in his voice. But it's her grave. And I intend to claim it for her. They moved quickly through the corridors, heading back toward Jarrek's stealth ship, the shadow of Lyra's promise driving every step. The human envoy, blinded by love, was now fully transformed into the Queen's deadliest assassin. The jump to Obsidian Fall was jarring, even for Jarrek's expertly shielded Krellian vessel. The rogue planet lived up to its name, a swirling magnetic storm of sulfurous clouds perpetually masking a crust that was ripped open by tectonic scars. It was less a planet and more a massive, volatile core barely contained by gravity. Geothermal interference is off the charts. Thorn, Jarrek's voice crackled through the comms, fighting the static generated by the planetary environment. I'm taking the ship down deep into a magnetic shadow near the old Xylos mine. But even my shields won't last long in this atmospheric pressure. We have about 48 hours tops before we're stuck here permanently. As the ship plummeted through the swirling vortex of black and red clouds, Elias felt the air within the cockpit begin to heat violently. The internal systems of his Terran uniform screamed in protest, but the obsidian cuff Lyra had given him pulsed with a cool, steady blue light. It emitted a localized dampening field that stabilized his immediate environment and silenced the static in his personal comm frequency. Lyra's gift was functioning perfectly, granting him passage where no unauthorized KWN could tread. The cuff is holding the interference back, Elias confirmed. Target analysis? Volkov's fortress is built into the primary caldera vent, roughly 20 clicks from our landing zone. It utilizes the raw planetary heat for power and shielding. It's a logistical nightmare to attack but strategically sound. The magnetic chaos means no reliable orbital bombardment. They landed with a sickening crunch in a deep, shadowed chasm. The moment the ramp lowered, the environment assaulted Elias. The air was thick and poisonous, forcing his suit's recyclers into overdrive. The ground was composed of razor-sharp, heat-fused obsidian shards, slick with geothermal runoff. Above them, the sky was a permanent, terrifying ceiling of churning red and black. This is where ambition comes to die, Thorn, Yarrick said, shouldering a Krellian laser rifle. Or where a new ambition is born, Elias countered, pulling his own energy pistol. He looked at the obsidian cuff. Every step he took, every challenge the environment presented, reaffirmed his value to Lyra. The more impossible the task, the more worthy he became. They moved across the tortured landscape for hours. The journey was grueling, a testament to human endurance against a planetary hazard. The geothermal surges were constant, waves of heat and magnetic noise that momentarily blinded them and sent their internal navigation systems spinning wildly. Without the dampening field of the cuff, Elias knew he would have been rendered unconscious or fried long ago. It was during a moment of relative calm, near a ridge of smoking sulfur vents, that they encountered the first opposition. 3 Kiwan guards, Volkov's loyalists, were patrolling the perimeter of the caldera. They were using heavy, armored vehicles equipped with massive heat sinks, struggling through the terrain where Elias and Yarek moved with relative speed. 3 o'clock, heavily armed, Yarek whispered. We bypass them. No, Elias stated, already drawing his weapon. We eliminate them. We can't risk them reporting unusual energy signatures. We need to go silent and fast. Elias initiated the attack. He didn't rely on brute force. As the KYN vehicle lumbered past, he used the magnetic properties of the cuff to temporarily destabilize the surface beneath the vehicle's track. The massive vehicle slid, tilting precariously into a fissure. Distracted, the 3 KYN soldiers turned, raising their weapons. But Elias was already closing the distance. He was smaller, faster, and utterly fearless. He discharged a targeted burst of Terran kinetic energy rounds into the exposed joints of the first guard, crippling its legs and sending it crashing to the ground. The second guard reacted immediately, unleashing a stream of plasma fire. Elias used the KYN-enhanced cuff, slamming a temporary localized shield boost, diverting the plasma fire just long enough to close in. He plunged his combat knife, standard-issue Terran carbide, into the KYN's neck sheath, silencing it instantly. The third guard, realizing the impossible agility of the small human, tried to sound a wider alarm. Elias was faster. He shot the KYN's communicator unit, then leveled his energy pistol and fired directly at the guard's unshielded faceplate. 3 KYN, eliminated in under 30 seconds, utilizing speed, precision, and technology the KYN dismissed as primitive. You're getting messy, Thorn, Yarek noted, though there was a hint of reluctant admiration in his voice as he quickly harvested the KYN's internal comm units. But efficient. That cuff, it's doing more than just filtering static. Lyra gave you an advantage. She gave me the tools to succeed, Elias retorted, feeling a surge of pride. The successful execution, the quick kill, it was an offering to the queen. They pressed on, reaching the edge of the great caldera. Volkov's fortress was immense, a dark, spiked structure fused directly into the side of the geological vent, drawing immense power from the molten lava beneath. It was impenetrable from the outside. Only one way in, Yarek stated, pointing to a massive, heavily reinforced ventilation shaft that ran down the side of the fortress. The airlock will be heavily secured. We go through the primary environmental conduit. They navigated the sheer descent, using grappling lines and magnetic attachments, until they reached the ventilation shaft. Elias used his cipher breaker again, bypassing the basic magnetic locks, and they slipped inside. The interior of the fortress was dry, hot, and smelled strongly of sulfur and ancient, oxidized metal. They were moving through the fortress's literal lungs. Following Jarek's tactical guidance, they navigated through service tunnels until they reached a point high above the central command chamber. They found a perfect vantage point, a graded service port looking down onto a massive tactical display, where Volkov and several of his high-ranking officers were assembled. Volkov looked different now, his rage having settled into cold, military focus. He was no longer reacting, he was preparing. The Queen is playing games, gentlemen, Volkov's voice boomed up to them. She sent a human. A diplomatic courier. She thinks so little of me that she assumes a soft-skinned creature driven by infantile lust can undo my work. Elias felt a surge of rage at the description of his love as infantile lust, but he held himself still. Sir, the courier, he was the one who stole the sanguine key, one officer nervously stated. Yes, and he survived the drop. What? Volkov slammed his fist onto the table. Because Lyra provided him with the necessary defense. She invests resources only in tools she can break. He is her new favorite toy, her little human assassin, fueled by the fantasy of immortality and proximity. She does this every few cycles, gentlemen. She finds a malleable servant, tasks them with impossible feats, and when their foolish ambition runs dry, she consumes them. Elias felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the environment. It was the crushing weight of Jarek's cynicism confirmed by the enemy. But this time, Volkov continued, leaning into the light, his eyes gleaming with mad ambition. The human's ambition will serve us. I didn't just steal the sanguine key, men. I stole the Codex of Succession. The genetic keys to Lyra's ancestral vault. The key only stabilizes her current bloodline. The Codex contains the truth of how the KYN royal line was created, and how it can be permanently corrupted or, better yet, replaced. Volkov's gaze swept over his officers. When the human arrives, and he will arrive, driven by his pathetic desire to impress his mistress, we will give him the Codex. Let him take it back. Let him deliver the means of his queen's ultimate downfall straight into her hands. That will be my true final humiliation of Lyra Valerius. Elias felt the sanguine key's crimson glow, still warm in his shielded pocket, suddenly feel cold. He had risked everything, killed for her, and she had sent him on a mission that was meant to be a simple recovery but was secretly a far more intricate, deadly betrayal against her rival. But now Volkov had revealed the true depth of the trap. He didn't want the key back, he wanted the codex planted. He was a pawn in a game far larger than he realized, caught between a tyrannical queen and a vengeful general. Elias looked at Yarrick, who was looking back at him with an expression that said, "I told you so. We have to move." Thorn, Yarrick hissed. "He's expecting you. He's going to let you take the codex." Elias gripped his pistol, his focus shifting. Volkov was not just a target. He was now a dealer of terrible, life-altering truth. Elias needed to kill Volkov, but he also needed that codex. The thought of delivering the means of Lyra's destruction to her, even if it was Volkov's trap, felt like the ultimate betrayal of his love. But what if the codex contained a secret that would free Lyra from this cycle of tyranny? What if it was the key to truly winning her? The obsession remained, warping his sense of reality, even in the face of absolute betrayal. He just needed to know the truth. "Yarrick," Elias whispered, his voice dangerously low. "We change the plan. We don't just kill him. We secure the codex first." As Elias prepared to breach the chamber, the floor beneath them vibrated violently. Volkov, having finished his briefing, issued a chilling command. "The geothermal core is destabilizing. Bring the extraction vessel to the north hangar now. We are moving off-world. And set the perimeter defenses to maximum annihilation mode. The Queen's little toy will find his death waiting for him." The lights in the command chamber flickered and died. The hunt had become a desperate race against time and a planetary self-destruct sequence. The command chamber went dark, plunging Elias and Yarrick into an absolute, suffocating blackness. The ambient noise of the fortress, the drone hum, the steady thrum of power, was replaced by a chilling silence, broken only by the deep, seismic groan of the caldera structure beginning to tear itself apart. "Maximum annihilation mode is active." Thorn, Jarrek's voice was strained, cut with static. "Volkov just released the pressure seals on the main vents. This entire structure is going to be pulverized by internal heat in T-15 minutes. We need to move now." Elias didn't hesitate. He activated the secondary sensors on Lyra's obsidian cuff. The world immediately resolved into a high-contrast thermal image. The superheated metal glowing crimson and white, the cool air pockets appearing blue. More chillingly, the tunnels ahead were laced with tripwires and motion-sensitive plasma cannons, Volkov's final, desperate defenses. "Target the central corridor. Volkov won't take the winding paths," Elias commanded. "He'll head straight to his extraction point. Yarrick, keep the comms open and focus on bypassing the power routing to those plasma cannons. I'll handle the pressure seals." They descended through a ventilation shaft that now served as an emergency access route. The air was scorching, the vibrations intense. Elias moved with a primal, focused intensity. The reality of Lyra's manipulation, using his love as a lure, had done nothing to diminish his devotion. If anything, it had sharpened it. He was not just executing an order. He was stepping into the middle of a conflict that defined her existence. He had to succeed not just to save his species, but to prove he was worthy of her complex, terrifying attention. They reached a wide access tunnel. The moment they stepped onto the floor, the static cameras detected them, and a swarm of miniaturized, armed drones, Volkov's mobile defense systems, dropped from the ceiling. "Drones. 6 of them," Yarrick shouted. Elias reacted with the cold precision of a predator. He didn't fire his energy pistol wildly. He used the limited power of his wrist cuff to momentarily destabilize the magnetic field in the central area. The KYN drones, relying on precise magnetic flight paths, instantly tumbled out of formation. Elias hit them mid-fall with quick, controlled bursts of energy fire, neutralizing 4 before they could recover. The remaining 2 were smarter. They converged on Yarrick, recognizing the Krellian as the softer target. "My hands are tied, Thorn. I'm still working the plasma routing," Yarrick yelled, scrambling for cover. Elias threw a small, high-yield kinetic charge. It didn't explode, it detonated magnetically, clinging to the wall near the drones and overloading their proximity sensors. The drones, confused, fired wildly at the wall, destroying themselves. Elias yelled. They sprinted down the hallway, heat shields barely holding. Yarrick finally managed to bypass the final security junction. The red alert lights on the plasma cannons lining the hallway flashed and died. "We're clear to the main vault level," Yarrick confirmed, breathing heavily. "Volkov's private armory. The codex should be there. They arrived at a vault door reinforced with ancient, ritualistic warding, layers of protection far older and more formidable than the cipher lock on the Sanguine Key container. This is not a digital lock, Thorn. This is ritualistic security, Yarrick said, running his hand over the strange, swirling symbols carved into the dark metal. It needs a genetic key, possibly Volkov's, or a complete system overload. We don't have time for either. Elias pressed the obsidian cuff against the central seal. It pulsed fiercely, not with the gentle blue light of the dampener, but with a vibrant, raw purple energy, Lyra's command frequency. The ancient symbols on the vault door began to glow, then crackle. Lyra gave me access, Elias breathed, watching the complex KYN ritual seals disintegrate under the sheer raw power of the Queen's own technology. She anticipated this. The heavy vault door hissed open. Inside, on a simple obsidian pedestal, sat the Codex of Succession. It wasn't a book. It was a heavy, slate-gray metal tablet etched with countless minute, swirling symbols that hurt the eyes to look at directly. It felt cold, weighty, and utterly final. Elias seized the codex, securing it in his uniform's internal pocket, balancing the weight of it against the Sanguine Key he already carried. He now held the full set, the cure and the poison, the stabilizing factor and the means of total destruction. Codex secured. Now let's find Volkov, Elias stated, already moving toward the hangar access tunnel. The tunnel led them to a vast, open hangar bay where the airlock was already beginning to cycle. General Volkov stood at the ramp of a small, heavily armored escape vessel. Not a warship, but a sleek, fast personal shuttle. He was flanked by his last 4 elite guards. Volkov turned slowly, the fury in his eyes replaced by a chilling, triumphant certainty. I knew you would come, little toy. Volkov's voice was amplified, resonating through the hangar. Your devotion is so predictable. Did you enjoy the run? Did Lyra's little trinket keep you warm? Elias stopped 20 feet from the general, the deafening sound of the caldera collapsing outside framing the confrontation. The game is over, Volkov, Elias said, raising his energy pistol. The Queen wants your head. Volkov laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed off the high ceiling. The Queen wants her humiliation, human. And you have delivered it. You brought her the key, denying me my immediate weapon. And now, you hold the codex, the ultimate weapon against her entire existence. I knew your tiny, simple mind would be unable to resist such a magnificent treasure. Take it to her. Let her face the reality that her own beloved assassin delivered the means of her genetic collapse. Volkov was enormous, his bronze armor glowing with geothermal power. He was a mountain of muscle and ancient KYN wrath. Elias was just a man. But Elias remembered the ultimate truth of the HFY protocols. Never engage the KYN on their terms. You misunderstand, General, Elias said, a cold, focused calm settling over him. I didn't take the codex because I was lured by its magnificence. I took it because it allows me to choose the terms of your demise. Volkov signaled his guards. Kill the human. He is no longer needed. The 4 elite guards raised their plasma weapons. Elias didn't waste fire on them. He dropped low and fired his energy pistol directly at a small, heavily wired geothermal conduit running along the floor near Volkov's feet, a crucial power line feeding the escape shuttle. The conduit exploded in a blinding flash of raw heat and electricity. The force of the explosion wasn't enough to kill the KWIN, but the secondary effect was devastating. Volkov's guards, momentarily stunned by the proximity blast, stumbled. Elias used the distraction, sprinting laterally, avoiding the slow, sweeping fire from the guards. He fired 2 bursts into the knees of the closest guards, then activated the highest magnetic field possible on his wrist cuff. The pulse was short but fierce. The KYN, naturally sensitive to magnetic interference, screamed as the pulse temporarily overloaded their sensory organs. Volkov, enraged, charged forward, his massive hands reaching to crush Elias. You die now, human. Elias knew he couldn't win a direct fight. He dodged the general's wide swing, feeling the wind shear of the near miss. As Volkov turned, Elias spotted the weakness Yarrick had noted, a seam in the bronze armor near the general's spine, where the exoskeleton drew power from an external unit. With a desperate final burst of speed, Elias leaped onto Volkov's back, driving his combat knife through the vulnerable power seam. The general bellowed, an inhuman sound of pain and shattering power. His bronze armor instantly overloaded, electrical fire tearing through the circuits. Volkov staggered, grasping wildly at the human clinging to his back. Lyra will break you. Volkov gargled, before collapsing in a sparking, shuddering heap on the hangar floor. The remaining 2 guards, seeing their leader fall and the entire hangar beginning to buckle, abandoned their post and fled into the escape shuttle, sealing the hatch immediately. Thorn. Get out of there. The planet is in free fall. Jarek's voice screamed through the comm. Elias pulled the knife free, turning to see the general's body twitching faintly. Volkov was neutralized. Elias ran toward the edge of the hangar bay and fired his grappling hook, climbing toward the opening where Jarek's ship was already descending, struggling against the catastrophic atmospheric turbulence. He hauled himself aboard the Krellian vessel just as the hangar floor gave way entirely. They shot out of the disintegrating fortress, narrowly avoiding massive chunks of molten rock and flying debris, leaving the burning, dying planet of Obsidian Fall behind. Safely in the cold vacuum of space, Elias slumped into a seat, breathing heavily, his body bruised and aching, but his mission successful. He looked at the two objects in his possession. The Sanguine Key, Lyra's purity, Lyra's stability. And the Codex of Succession, the tool of her potential collapse, the truth of her power. Elias had done Lyra's bidding, eliminated her threat, and yet he now possessed the means to blackmail, control, or even save her, depending on how he chose to use the final weapon. The proximity she offered suddenly felt less like a reward and more like a high-stakes interrogation. I am coming back, Lyra Valerius, Elias thought, staring at the swirling symbols on the codex. And this time I will not be just your pet. The jump drive kicked them into KYN space, the familiar, star-choked void replacing the terrifying, molten chaos of Obsidian Fall. Yarrick set the Krellian ship on a high-speed trajectory back toward the fortress of Ethel, maintaining a tense, almost unnatural silence. Elias sat in the sterile confines of the medbay, ignoring the automated repair functions trying to mend his severe bruising and second-degree burns. His focus was entirely on the Codex of Succession. He had Volkov's bronze crown, a jagged, heavy piece of metal ripped from the dead general's head, ready to present as his trophy. But the true power lay in the ancient slate in his hands. You're going to open that, aren't you? Jarek's voice finally broke the silence, heavy with resignation. I have to know what I'm holding, Elias said simply. I cannot serve her if I don't know the stakes of her power. The codex was cold, radiating an energy that felt different from the Sanguine Key's pure, biological pulse. It felt informational, etched with symbols that seemed to shift under ambient light. Elias, using his cuffs processor to cross-reference the symbols with known galactic languages, discovered the impossible. The language was an ancient variant of Proto-Terran, used by early human colonies before the Great Schism. Volkov hadn't intended for Lyra to read it. He intended for Elias to read it. Elias began to translate, the truth unfolding like a biological horror. The Codex revealed that the KYN were not a naturally evolved immortal species. They were a creation. The architects, a long-vanished, hyper-advanced non-KYN race, had engineered the first KYN queen using the most resilient, adaptable, and emotionally volatile DNA they could find, early Terran genetic material. The KYN were the ultimate human evolutionary branch, optimized for strength, longevity, and psychic dominance, designed to be the architect's immortal proxy rulers. The Sanguine Key was merely the genetic stabilizer to prevent catastrophic trait decay. The Codex, however, was the master blueprint containing the fail-safe, specific gene sequences and resonant frequencies that, if injected into the KYN populace, would trigger a rapid genetic de-evolution back to the Terran baseline, stripping them of their immortality, psychic power, and their crimson, predatory traits. The KYN were not demons, they were genetically enhanced humans gone wrong. Lyra Valerius, the Queen of Eternal Midnight, was his ancestor, his cousin, the pinnacle of the human fuckia ideal, warped into a tyrannical monster. Elias felt a cold, calculated terror mingle with his burning obsession. This didn't just destabilize Lyra, it gave Elias, a mere human, the power to end the entire KYN race by making them mortal again. This was the ultimate trump card. You see it now, Yarrick said, watching the horrified realization on Elias's face. Volkov knew the human's genetic connection would allow him to bypass the KYN security and read the truth. He wanted you to use this as leverage against Lyra, knowing that if you succeeded, the KYN would see the truth and turn on her for hiding the creation myth. He wanted me to destroy her reign from the inside, using her own lineage as the weapon, Elias finished, his voice hollow. He wanted to see her pride shatter. And what do you do now, Thorn? You have the ultimate power over your love. Do you choose the destruction she deserves, or the impossible protection she needs? Yarrick pressed. Elias secured the codex deep within the ship's hardened vault, creating a triple redundant lock keyed to his unique Terran biosignature. He wouldn't destroy it. He wouldn't give it to Lyra. I give her the head of her enemy and the lie she wants to hear, Elias declared, his eyes hardening. The truce is safe and I become her consort. The codex is my insurance. My true courting gift will be the truth, when I can finally offer it without her crushing me for the attempt. They arrived at Ethel, and Elias was immediately escorted to the throne room, this time by the highest echelon of Kawen Guard. He was no longer a diplomat or a clandestine assassin. He was a celebrity, the human who had done the impossible. Lyra Valerius was not alone this time. Her court was present. Hundreds of Kawen nobility, generals, and advisors stood arrayed on both sides of the vast hall, their faces impassive, awaiting the outcome of the queen's latest game. Elias walked the gauntlet, ignoring the hostile, judging eyes. He moved straight to the throne, dropping the heavy, jagged piece of Volkov's bronze crown onto the floor with a loud clang that echoed through the silence. "General Volkov is neutralized, Your Majesty," Elias announced, his voice carrying the confidence of a man holding the galaxy's greatest secret. "His body remains on the collapsing surface of Obsidian Fall. His threat to your reign is over." A palpable hum of awe and disbelief rippled through the court. A human had killed General Volkov. Lyra, however, remained utterly unmoved. She merely stared at the crown piece, then slowly raised her gaze to Elias. "A job well executed, Envoy Thorn. My thanks for the efficiency. But you disappoint me on the second count," she stated, her voice icy. "The Codex. Where is the Codex of Succession? Volkov possessed it. You killed him. I want it now." Elias met her gaze, his heart hammering against his ribs, but his expression schooled into weary regret. "Your Majesty, the Codex was destroyed," Elias lied smoothly, the greatest lie he had ever told. "Volkov, in his final moments of rage, programmed the planetary core to destabilize. The entire vault structure was vaporized seconds after I killed him. Nothing survived the collapse." Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. Lyra's eyes narrowed, searching his face. Elias felt the full, unfiltered power of her psychic dominance probing his mind, tearing at his memories, looking for any flicker of deception. He had prepared for this. He focused fiercely on the image of the vault collapsing, the fire and the magma, the truth of the destruction, while compartmentalizing the memory of the Codex's safe retrieval. The psychic assault lasted for a timeless moment. It felt like his brain was being scraped clean, his secrets exposed. Finally, Lyra withdrew, a flicker of something unreadable, disappointment? Or grudging respect? In her crimson gaze. "A pity. A magnificent piece of history lost to the dust of an asteroid," she said, her voice dropping lower, speaking only to him. "You lie, Elias Thorn. But you lie with conviction and you killed your target. That I find compelling." She raised her hand, her expression one of ultimate authority. "The truth stands and your species is granted the respite it craves. And you, Elias Thorn, have fulfilled my initial challenge." She rose from the throne, unfolding her dark, terrifying wings. The entire court dropped to a knee in reverence. The human envoy is no longer merely a diplomat. He has proven his strength, his audacity, and his terrifying ambition. Let it be known throughout the Kawan Empire. Elias Thorn is now designated the consort of the throne of Ethel. Elias felt a dizzying wave of triumph. He was in. He had survived, killed her enemy, saved his species, and achieved the impossible closeness he craved. The reward was his. He was escorted to his new quarters, a magnificent suite deep within the fortress, lavishly appointed yet separated from the rest of the court by multiple layers of security. It was a gilded cage, but it was her cage. Hours later, alone, Elias stood by the vast, black window looking out onto the eternal night of Kawen space. He pulled out the bronze crown piece, Volkov's final token, and tossed it onto a velvet table. He was the consort. The game was won. Then, using his obsidian cuff, he pulled up the encrypted image file he had taken of the Codex. He focused on the final, swirling glyphs, the warning that Volkov intended for Lyra to see. The final entry wasn't about the KYN's creation. It was about the architect's return. The instability caused by the movement of the key and the Codex had awakened the ancient signals left behind by their creators. The architects were scheduled to return to claim their property, the KYN Empire, in a matter of months. Elias had not won the game. He had merely entered the real battlefield. His love for Lyra was real, but the obsession now had a singular, terrifying purpose. He had to use the human secret of the Codex to save the monster he loved from her own creators, and, in doing so, save his own species from the inevitable ensuing galactic war. His new position wasn't a reward, it was the ultimate, necessary infiltration. Elias Thorn's life as the consort of Ethel was a study in profound, high-stakes psychological warfare, draped in velvet and obsidian. He inhabited a golden cage, a sprawling suite where the only constant comfort was the fact that he was within easy access of Lyra Valerius. His days were a ritual of forced proximity. He attended court, stood silently at the queen's side as she rendered judgment, and participated in the endless, elaborate banquets, yet he was always under the unwavering, watchful gaze of her personal guard. The intimacy Lyra had promised was not physical. It was a constant, grueling test of his loyalty and a mesmerizing display of her power. She would engage him in debates on galactic strategy, forcing him to defend human ingenuity and Terran tactics, only to dismantle his arguments with chilling efficiency. "Your human sentimentality is a flaw, consort," she murmured to him one evening, while watching a distant Kwan fleet execute orbital maneuvers. "But your audacity, your refusal to break. That is the only thing of interest you Terrans possess. Tell me, if I commanded you to deliver the coordinates of your home world, the one your kind calls New Earth, would you do it?" Elias met her crimson eyes, a calculated lack of fear defining his response. "You already have the coordinates, Your Majesty. I carried them in my comm implant during my diplomatic mission. If you wanted the planet annihilated, you would have already commanded it. You ask not to test my capacity for betrayal, but to test my capacity for survival. I will always choose your survival over theirs for now. My love demands your continued reign, Lyra." She smiled, a slow, predatory appreciation that sent a dizzying wave of triumph through his chest. Such beautiful, desperate devotion. "You passed, Elias. But be warned. The moment that commitment wavers, I will watch you tear your own planet apart before I tear your heart from your chest." This psychological dance was the true reward. Lyra was constantly measuring his obsession, unknowingly forging the shield she would need against the coming threat. While playing the role of the infatuated consort, Elias began his covert operations. He activated the deep-spectrum sensor arrays in the obsidian cuff Lyra had given him. Disguising his activity as the consort's architectural study, he began running low-level diagnostics on the fortress's archaic energy grid and its long-dormant historical databases. Yarrick, having vanished back into the Kyn underworld, was his only contact. They communicated using burst transmissions encrypted in the background noise of the Kyn's commercial fleet broadcasts, a high-risk channel. "I found it," Thorn Jarrek's static-laced voice whispered across the void one night. "The creation myths. They call them the Makers. They are described as beings of pure, solidified thought, who left behind vast and used energy nodes within the core Kyn systems. Nodes that are too complex for the current Kyn tech to activate, but perfect for a precursor race to use as beacons or power conduits." Confirming the Codex's warning, Elias muttered, staring at a schematic of Ethel's defense grid on his cuff's display. The ancient energy nodes Yarrick described were clustered beneath the planet's primary shield projector, the very place Volkov had sabotaged during his retreat. Elias realized that the Kyn's advanced plasma shields were entirely focused on modern threats, Terran kinetic strikes or Xylos phase weaponry. They had forgotten how to defend against their own history. If the architects returned, they wouldn't use conventional weapons. They would hijack the deep-seated, forgotten infrastructure of the Kyn Empire. He needed to subtly upgrade Lyra's defenses without revealing the true enemy. During a strategic briefing with Lyra's War Council, a gathering where Elias was usually an ignored ornament, he seized his moment. "Your Majesty," Elias interjected, interrupting a pompous Kyn general debating fleet deployment. "I have been reviewing the historical schematics of the Ethel defense grid. Your current antimatter shield arrays are formidable against conventional threats, but I note several ancient, deep-core energy relays that are entirely dormant. If the Terran Commonwealth were to develop a hypothetical weapon capable of interfacing with a civilization's foundational power structure, a form of deep-spectrum resonance weapon, those dormant nodes would become catastrophic vulnerabilities." The court fell silent. Kyn's strategy relied on known threats, and the notion of a hypothetical weapon was alien to them. Lyra, however, looked intrigued. She dismissed the general's protests with a casual wave of her hand. "Explain, consort. Why would your short-lived species develop such a sophisticated, non-destructive weapon?" Elias lied by omission, drawing on his engineering background. "Terrans are creatures of desperation and ingenuity, Lyra. We are excellent at exploiting the laziness of ancient defenses. Reinforcing those dormant nodes is cheap insurance against a future, unexpected threat that bypasses the conventional shield protocols. It would require allocating minimal resources but provide massive, unseen security." Lyra stared at him, assessing his ambition, his mind calculating the tactical benefit. She saw only the fear of his species driving his counsel. A curious proposition. "The human fears what he knows he is capable of creating," she observed. She then issued a chilling command, solidifying Elias's new influence. "General Rhakl, allocate Consort Thorn the necessary personnel and resources. Oversee the reinforcement of those nodes." I trust his paranoia more than your complacency. Elias felt a profound sense of achievement. He had just secured the first phase of Lyra's defense against the architects. For the next week, Elias worked relentlessly coordinating the defense upgrade. He used the assignment to systematically analyze the old energy networks, preparing them not just for reinforcement, but for potential overload, a final weapon, if needed, against the architects themselves. It was late one cycle, while Elias was analyzing a deep space seismic report on his cuff, that the atmosphere of the fortress changed. The entire structure of Ethel experienced a microtremor, subtle enough that the KYN dismissed it as geothermal instability. Elias looked at the seismic reading. It wasn't seismic. It was a faint, impossibly fast chronometric distortion signature, a ripple in spacetime itself. Jarek's urgent, panicked burst transmission followed immediately. Thorn. They've arrived. An early reconnaissance vessel, silent and fast. It just phase-jumped into the outer periphery of KYN space. They are not months away, they are weeks away. The instability from the key and codex was a bigger beacon than we thought. Elias looked out the vast window. In the cold, black void of space, a pinprick of unnatural, impossible blue light suddenly blossomed and faded, far beyond the visual range of KYN telescopes. It was a ghost of a ship, a mere temporal distortion, but it confirmed the terrifying truth. The courting phase was over. Lyra was still unaware, but her creators had just knocked on her front door. Elias had mere weeks to turn his love, the vampire queen, into a desperate ally against extinction. He had to convince her to fight an enemy she didn't know existed, and he had to do it using the very secret that could end her life. Elias could not wait for a formal audience. He ignored the protocol of his gilded cage and used the highest security override of Lyra's obsidian cuff to bypass the layered sentinel barriers guarding her private spire. He found her in her inner sanctuary, a chamber of cold, dark serenity where she often communed with the ancient, residual energies of the KYN. She was seated on a simple dais, her wings folded close, her eyes closed in meditation. The guards in the room instantly moved to neutralize him, but Elias didn't draw a weapon. He simply stood there, radiating focused urgency. "I apologize for the intrusion, Your Majesty," Elias said, his voice carrying the weight of the coming galactic calamity. "But the game has changed. The threat is here, and your strategy is currently aimed at the wrong enemy." Lyra opened her eyes, and the crimson glow was laced with cold fury. "You trespass, consort," Lyra's voice was dangerously quiet. "And you presume to challenge my strategic calculus. You have been enjoying my favor, Elias, but do not mistake proximity for parity. I challenge your complacency, Lyra. The tremor you felt tonight was not a natural event. It was a chronometric distortion. It was the precursor signal of the architects, your makers." The name hung in the air, a blasphemy. Lyra did not physically react, but Elias felt the cold, psychic shockwave ripple through the chamber. The guards hesitated, sensing the intensity of the exchange. "You speak of KYN children's myths, Thorn. Beings of thought that vanished eons ago. Did Volkov implant this nonsense in your dreams as a final poison?" Lyra scoffed, though the dismissal lacked her usual finality. Volkov knew they were real. He knew the movement of the sanguine key was a beacon. He planned to use the codex to strip you of your KYN nature, believing the makers would destroy the KYN but spare a primitive Terran. I killed him before he could execute that final treason, but his threat was founded in truth. Elias stepped closer, defying the KYN guards who were now aiming plasma weapons at his back. "They are coming back to reclaim their property, Lyra. They will not use plasma shields or kinetic rounds. They will use the forgotten infrastructure of your own empire, the massive, dormant energy nodes that Volkov destabilized and that I am currently reinforcing." Lyra rose fully, her massive wings snapping open, dominating the room. The force of her psychic will slammed into Elias, harder than the pressure on Obsidian Fall, searching for the truth of the codex that she suspected he hid. "You lie. You hide the codex, and you use an ancient fairy tale to manipulate my defenses." Lyra's mind voice shrieked in his skull. "I will tear your mind apart piece by piece, human, until you reveal the source of this betrayal." Elias staggered under the assault, blood trickling from his nose, but he held fast, the certainty of the codex's truth acting as his shield. He endured the pain, not resisting Lyra's power, but allowing it to wash over the genuine fear he felt for her life. "Do it, Lyra. Break me." Elias choked out, collapsing to one knee. "But my love is true. It is the only real thing in this chamber. The architects are not flesh. They are pure thought and technology. They will not fight your fleet. They will disassemble your civilization. The ancient defense system is the only thing that will detect them." As the intense psychic confrontation reached its breaking point, A deep, jarring alarm sliced through the fortress's network, a code never heard before. Lyra instantly withdrew her power, her crimson eyes flickering to the large tactical display embedded in the chamber wall. On the screen, a small KYN reconnaissance vessel, the Hunter's Dagger, was patrolling the outer sector, the same sector Yarrick had warned him about. Then, without warning, the Hunter's Dagger simply vanished. Not an explosion. Not shield failure. It was as if the ship's molecular structure had been instantaneously and perfectly erased from existence. One moment it was there, the next only a clean vacuum remained. The KYN defense systems registered nothing. No incoming fire, no energy signature. Lyra stared at the screen, her lips parted in disbelief, her regal composure finally fracturing. The impossible had happened. Her most advanced scout vessel was annihilated by nothing. Jarrek's emergency burst transmission then crackled into Elias's obsidian cuff, which he had linked to the room's main display. Thorn, that was the Architect's scout probe. They just vaporized the KYN patrol. They used temporal displacement fields to erase matter from the timeline. The KYN have no defense against it. They are coming, and they view this entire empire as defective property. Lyra looked from the annihilated space where the ship had been, back to the human kneeling before her, who was bleeding but utterly unbowed. The truth, impossible, terrifying, and delivered by a creature of obsession, was undeniable. "You have lied to me, consort," Lyra stated, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. "But you are the only thing in this damned galaxy that saw the unseen threat." She waved her hand, dismissing the frozen guards. "Leave us." General RHAKL is now under the consort's direct strategic command. He has 3 Terran weeks to make my fleet ready for a ghost war. Lyra descended from the dais, moving with fluid, lethal grace until she stood directly over Elias. "Rise, Elias Thorn. You are no longer merely a consort or a pet. You are my shield bearer. You will fight this war for me, and you will win it, or I will ensure your death is the most spectacular event of the coming apocalypse." Lyra reached out and gripped the chin of the bleeding human. Her touch was possessive, agonizing, and yet fueled Elias with a desperate, terrifying euphoria. "You have proven your love, Elias. Now prove your utility. Tell me what they fear. Tell me how to kill a thought." "They fear obsolescence, Lyra," Elias whispered, meeting her gaze. "And they fear the very human ingenuity they tried to eliminate when they created you." The dynamic had shifted completely. Elias was now Lyra's indispensable partner, privy to her most desperate strategic vulnerabilities. That night, Lyra did not dismiss him. She took him not as a lover but as a political claim, a show of absolute trust and possession before the inevitable war. The intimacy was charged with power, fear, and the crushing weight of their mutual doom. In the brief moments of rest, Elias used his cuff to finalize the code sequence for the Codex's failsafe. He was creating a Terran KYN hybrid weapon, a system that could, with a single command, activate the de-evolution field and strip Lyra and her empire of their KYN nature. This was his ultimate defense. If the Architects won, Elias would use the Codex to revert Lyra and the remaining KYN back to their human origin, saving them from annihilation by making them merely mortal. The final act of his obsessive love was to be a terrible, forced salvation. The war for the soul of the galaxy, and for the heart of the Vampire Queen, was about to begin. The Fortress of Ethel, a monolith built on eternal, arrogant power, was now transformed into a frantic, high-tech war room. Elias Thorn, the human consort, stood at the center of the strategic array, flanked by generals and advisors who still harbored deep resentment but now obeyed him with chilling precision. They called him the shield bearer, but Elias knew he was merely the conductor of their final orchestra of defiance. He forced the KYN to abandon the centuries of ingrained tactical doctrine. "Their attack isn't a fleet movement, it's a temporal intrusion," Elias explained to General RHAKL, the KYN commander now subservient to the Humans' Council. "We will not meet their ships with ours. We will meet their entry point with a counter-intrusion." Elias directed the full power of the KYN core energies toward the ancient nodes he had reinforced. His goal was to convert those long-dormant structures into massive, synchronized chronometric disruptors. Using Terran quantum entanglement principles, amplified by KYN power, the nodes would emit high-frequency gravitational waves designed to create localized spacetime instability. If the Architects relied on temporal stability to phase jump and execute their instantaneous erasure attacks, instability would be their poison. Lyra watched him from her strategic dais, her expression a mask of intense concentration and deep suspicion. She had granted him absolute command of her defenses, but her eyes constantly sought the lie he was concealing, the Codex. "If this Terran science fails, consort," she warned him, her voice a low thrum of power, "your death will be swift, but the regret will be eternal. My death means your destruction, Lyra. My success means your continued reign, Elias countered, not looking away from the schematics. The proximity was a dangerous addiction. The fear of losing her fueled his every tactical decision. Yarrick, operating from a hidden monitoring station near the edge of the system, provided the final, critical piece of intelligence. Thorn, the KYN archives mentioned the makers, the architects, only fled their domain after a massive gravitational anomaly. They are beings of crystalline thought, dependent on highly stable, multidimensional resonance. A sudden shift in the spacetime fabric is their undoing. Hit them with noise, consort. Flood their entry with gravitational noise. Elias confirmed the plan. Gravity. Noise. Spacetime disruption. The time limit expired with a sickening speed. The architects did not arrive from a jump point. They simply appeared. The KYN sensors screamed in confusion. A fleet of vast, shimmering, impossible structures materialized in the heart of the KYN sector. Not ships of metal, but immense, geometric forms composed of churning, crystalline thought and raw, contained light. They were beautiful and terrifying, a civilization of intellect so far beyond the KYN that they seemed to exist in a different dimension. The KYN fleet, mobilized according to ancient doctrine, charged forward. General RHA. Initiate Phase 1, Plasma Interdict. Elias commanded, watching the main strategic display. The KYN opened fire. Torrents of antimatter and plasma slammed into the architect's structures. The weapons simply phase-shifted through the targets, having no impact. Then the counterattack began. No explosions. No energy bolts. The lead KYN cruisers, one after another, shimmered briefly, then vanished, cleanly erased from the timeline, leaving nothing behind but a brief echo of silence. The erasure is working. Their temporal field is perfect. RHAKL shouted in panic. Phase 2. Initiate the disruptors now. Elias roared into the comms. The ancient energy nodes, reinforced by Terran ingenuity, flared to life, drawing immense power from Ethel's core. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. High-frequency gravitational waves, the spacetime noise, roared outward, crashing into the architect's formation. The impossible crystalline structures wavered. Their shimmering edges frayed. One of the massive geometric structures, attempting to erase a KYN destroyer, seemed to stutter, caught between two moments in time, before it dissolved into harmless, sparkling dust. A wave of astonished relief swept through the KYN command center. Elias's impossible theory was working. But the architects were not defeated. They were adapting. They regrouped and focused their unified power on Lyra's flagship, the Queen's Aegis, knowing the target was the core of KYN resistance. They are concentrating their temporal anchor on the Aegis. Elias realized, seeing the geometry of the chronometric disruptors warp under the architect's pressure. They are going to erase the Queen. Lyra, standing rigidly on the command deck, looked out at the approaching, shimmering death, her face pale, the usual crimson defiance fading under the weight of utter annihilation. The shield is failing, consort, Lyra whispered, her voice strained. Your ingenuity has only delayed the inevitable. They are stronger than your human theories. Elias knew the battle was lost. They had stalled the enemy, but they couldn't win the war. He only had one card left. I have a final plan, Your Majesty. Elias yelled over the wailing alarms. It will save you, but it will change everything. He slammed his hand onto the activation sequence of the codex, which he had covertly linked through his cuff to the main command systems. He could feel the immense, raw power of the de-evolution field, the power to strip Lyra and her remaining forces of their KYN nature, to revert them to fragile, mortal humans, saving them from the architect's temporal erasure by taking them out of the architect's genetic database. He was on the brink of the ultimate betrayal, the ultimate act of saving her against her will. He could hear the genetic sequence loading, the moment of no return hovering over his fingertip. He looked at Lyra, standing there, regal even in the face of oblivion. His love, absolute and terrifying, was about to force her into fragile mortality. Just one final press and she is saved, but she will never be the Queen again. Lyra looked at him, seeing the manic desperation, the raw knowledge of the codex shining in his eyes. She didn't know what he was doing, but she sensed the finality of the choice. Before Elias could press the trigger, Lyra raised her hand, not in command, but in a strange gesture of desperate acceptance. Do it, Elias, she commanded, her voice suddenly strong, stripped of artifice. Whatever madness you plan, execute it now. I will not perish as a broken creation. Elias pulled back. He realized that the codex was not the solution, it was surrender. Lyra wanted to fight. He had to give her a target. Not yet, Your Majesty. Elias shouted, adrenaline surging through him. We need a coordinated strike. Yarrick, give me the gravitational signature of their main anchor. We attack the heart. Elias had confirmed the codex worked, confirming his power over her fate, but he chose to fight on her terms. The ultimate confrontation with the architects, and with the truth of his relationship with Lyra, was about to begin. The command deck of the Queen's Aegis was a landscape of smoke and shattered metal. The Kyn fleet was reduced to a desperate, scattered few, and the architect's vanguard was consolidating for the final, annihilating sweep. Lyra stood unmoving, her armor scorched, but her presence radiating an unnerving stillness. We have delayed them, consort, Lyra said, her voice strained by the chaos. But the disruptors are failing. We bought ourselves 10 minutes, perhaps less. Their temporal anchor is too strong. Elias, still shaking from the near activation of the codex, gripped his obsidian cuff, staring at the raw power readings. The chronometric disruptors were failing because they were too diffuse. He needed to focus the entirety of the Kyn core energy into a single devastating point. He needed a conduit that could stabilize and shape raw temporal power, a conduit linked to the Kyn's very genetic structure. The codex is not a historical blueprint, Lyra, Elias spoke, his voice raw, looking straight into her eyes. It is a power conduit. The architects designed it to interface directly with the Kyn's core energy system. I can use the codex to focus the combined power of Ethel into a temporal shockwave. But I need the sanguine key to stabilize the pulse, and I need you to hold it. Lyra stared at him, the full extent of his hidden knowledge finally clicking into place. She realized the human hadn't just studied her history. He held the keys to her biology. You have been hiding the weapon of my destruction, Lyra observed, her voice devoid of emotion. And now you ask me to plunge the last fragments of my bloodline into your treacherous hands to save me. It is not destruction. It is salvation, Lyra, Elias countered, fueled by the desperate clarity of his devotion. The sanguine key, your life, must act as the stabilizing rod for the temporal pulse. The power will flow through you. If I fail, you will be instantly stripped of your Kyn nature or vaporized. But if we succeed, they will be gone. Lyra held his gaze for a long moment, the fear and the ancient, terrifying pride warring in her crimson eyes. She had no other choice. This was the true consummation of their impossible courtship. A shared leap into oblivion, driven by her power and his love. Take me to the core, consort, she commanded, the surrender absolute. Do not fail me, or I will haunt your short-lived life until the end of time. They abandoned the crippled Aegis, taking a high-speed shuttle to the fortress of Ethel's subterranean core nexus, the central reactor where the fortress drew and regulated its lifeblood energy. The nexus was a dizzying chamber of swirling energy conduits and crystalline reactors. Elias, wearing the obsidian cuff, led Lyra to the primary energy altar. He quickly linked his cuff to the main reactor interface. Yarrick, give me the precise temporal anchor point of the architect's flagship. We get one shot, Elias hissed into the comms. Anchor point confirmed, Thorn. They're locking on Ethel now. 5 minutes. Yarrick's voice was frantic. Elias turned to Lyra. She was already at the altar, her face illuminated by the raw, violet energy of the core. She held the sanguine key, the crimson crystal, out over the primary conduit. Ready, Lyra. I am initiating the codex interface. The energy will be immense. Elias activated the codex sequence through his cuff. It wasn't the de-evolution command, but the conduit activation protocol. The cuff glowed fiercely purple, linking the forbidden blueprint, the codex hidden in Yarrick's ship, to the Kyn's core power. Raw, untamed temporal energy roared through the nexus, threatening to tear the chamber apart. Elias fought to stabilize the flow, his mind screaming under the mental strain. He pushed the power toward Lyra and the sanguine key. Lyra gasped, her hands trembling. The crimson key flared to blinding white, drawing the immense, destructive power into its core. Elias watched in horror as the energy flow didn't just stabilize the key. It seemed to be drawing Lyra's very genetic essence, her life force, into the weapon. Focus, Lyra. Elias yelled, his own strength failing. Hold the pattern. He locked eyes with her. In that moment of shared, crushing terror, the artifice vanished. Lyra was no longer the ancient tyrant. She was a being fighting for her survival, utterly reliant on the human she loved to hate. Elias wasn't merely saving his species. He was saving her. With a final, agonizing surge of will, Lyra solidified the energy pattern. Fire. Elias screamed. He targeted the pulse through the main orbital projector, aiming the terrifying, stabilized temporal shockwave straight toward the architect's flagship. Miles above them, the sky seemed to tear open. The shockwave, focused and absolute, hit the temporal anchor. The architect's crystalline flagship shimmered violently, unable to sustain the massive, destructive noise in its temporal field. The impossible geometry cracked, then exploded into a silent, brilliant cascade of spacetime fragments. As the flagship was erased, the remaining architect's vessels, destabilized and directionless, dissolved one by one. The battlefield went silent. The threat was over. Elias collapsed onto the floor of the Nexus, the obsidian cuff sputtering violently, the intense power surge having nearly fried the Terran technology. He was alive. Lyra was alive. The KYN were safe. Weeks later, the fortress of Ethel was quiet, the wounds of war slowly healing. Lyra Valerius was back on her throne, overseeing the cleanup and the execution of the surviving cowardly generals. Elias Thorne, fully healed, was summoned to the throne room. He stood before her, not kneeling but standing tall, a posture of earned parity. Lyra dismissed the entire court, leaving only the two of them in the vast, echoing hall. "You saved my empire," Elias Thorne, Lyra stated, her crimson eyes intense. "You risked the annihilation of your pathetic little species, you killed the general who would have unseated me, and you wielded the raw power of my deepest secret against a foe I didn't even know existed." She stepped down from the throne, walking slowly toward him. "You are not merely my consort, Elias. You are my sovereign's shield. The one who holds the power over my existence." She stopped directly in front of him, the physical proximity overwhelming. "I know you hid the Codex of Succession. I felt the activation energy flow through the Sanguine Key. I know you could have stripped me of my KYN essence and left me as a short-lived human. I know you chose not to." She reached out, her taloned fingers gently touching the scorched metal of his obsidian cuff. "You have proven that your love is not naive. It is a force of galactic preservation, and it is entirely focused on me." She paused, the ultimate concession hanging in the air. "I cannot destroy you, Elias Thorne, because you are the only one who has ever truly mastered me. The only one who has seen my weakness and chosen to defend it. My promise is fulfilled. You shall stand at my side now and forever." Lyra raised her hand, resting it possessively on his shoulder. "You are consort of the throne of Ethel. But know this, my human, your life is now bound to my eternal, terrifying existence. We are partners in this secret, partners in this power, and partners until the final star burns out. You wanted me, Elias Thorne. You have me." She finally gave him the kiss of the vampire queen. A searing, possessive, dangerous embrace that sealed their impossible, terrifying, eternal bond. Elias had won the war, he had saved humanity, and he had claimed the most dangerous prize in the galaxy. He had fallen in love at first sight, and the vampire queen, who knew immediately, had accepted the consequence. The KWN Empire had a human ruler, and the greatest weapon in the universe, the Codex, remained hidden, the secret insurance for the human who dared to love a god.